Okay, so with that, I'd like to ask Meghan Barrett to share her screen. She'll be presenting decreases in Centris pallida male head widths across 5 decades in Hymenoptera Apidae.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be at BeeCon again. Just gonna share my screen and hopefully can I get confirmation that you can see my slides?
Yeah, you can see your slides. Yeah.
Perfect. Then let's get started. So I'm excited to be presenting some work that I did this past field season with Meredith Johnson, who is a graduate student in John Harrison's lab at ASU. I'm a postdoctoral scholar in Terry McGlynn's lab at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. And we actually just had this publication accepted this morning at Ecological Entomology, so you'll be able to see this work in print soon. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about climate change driving reductions in bee body size. And this is a trend that has been observed across multiple different species of bees in temperate regions of Europe and North America. What you're seeing on the right side of this screen is from Newton and Rehan 2020, and it's looking at changes in bumblebee body size from historical and current data sets. And you can see that for all 3 species, there's some decline in body size over time. And this kind of trend has been observed for numerous species in temperate regions. I will note that no studies have tracked the same kind of morphological shift over time in any desert bees. And this is probably really important to do because they may actually be more susceptible to climate change than those bees that are found in temperate regions for some obvious reasons. The other thing that's really interesting is that only one of these studies has really included both male and female bees and shifts in body size over time. And they found that there actually was no difference in body size of male bees over the last 100 years. Only females had declined in body size. So the authors of this study are positing that this is because of large male fitness advantages, preventing males from being able to decline in body size. But one thing that stood out to me when I looked at that study and thought a little bit about some of the species that they looked at are that many of those species didn't have documented fitness advantages for males, large or small. So one thing I thought could be interesting would be to actually look at a species that does have a very well-documented large male fitness advantage, and that's Centris pallida, which is a very lovely, very charismatic species found in the Sonoran Desert. These are solitary ground nesting bees, but they do aggregate, so you'll find several thousand bees all nesting in one area together, and that's a part of their mating biology. They're large-bodied with both narrow phenological and dietary breadth, which are conditions that often lead to declines in body size for bees. And 2 things make them particularly useful for this question. One is that they have persistent populations. They reuse the same nest site every year or every other year. And that's been happening since the 1970s. So you can actually study a single population of this bee instead of having to use, for example, historical samples in museums that have been collected from a large number of places. The other thing is that the species is really well studied for the males specifically. They have a unique alternative reproductive tactic system I'll talk a little bit about. And because of that ART, they've been studied since the 1970s and specifically in relation to their body size. And there's a super well-documented and very clear large male fitness advantage for Centris pallida. All right, so I said there's an ART in the males, and there is. They are dimorphic. So you can see here data that's been reproduced from Alcock's 1977 paper on this species. The data was collected in 1974 and 1975. And this is the paper where he really documents this dimorphism in the males. So you're seeing on the left here, a small morph male, and on the right, a large morph male. Obviously, they're different in body size and also different in coloration. And I'll talk about behavioral differences on the next slide. So what we're looking at is the proportion of, or like a frequency histogram of male head widths within the foraging male population. So this is sort of representative of the total population of males. And what we're seeing is that we have small morph males making up a substantial proportion, about 73% total of the population. To the left of this gray bar, which represents the intermediate males that are the breakpoint between these 2 morphs. And then to the right, we have about 21% of the males are making up this large morph male morph. So there's also differences in behaviors. Small morph males are the only type of males that engage in the hovering behavior. So what you'll see on each of these graphs that shows up is a dashed line that represents the intermediate males, where that split is between large and small. So we can see that hovering is only performed by small morph males. And this is data from our 2022 field season. So small morph males hover on the periphery of these big aggregations, and that is because they are too small to engage successfully in fighting and competition for mates. So their strategy for getting mates is often to just hover, and then if any females escape while the large males are fighting or dig themselves out of the ground, out of their natal nests, they'll mate with those females at trees or kind of find them in the sky. The next strategy is what large males do, and then some small males, especially the largest bodied small males, sometimes engage in. And this starts with patrolling. So this is where males will patrol in these long sweeping flights very close to the desert ground where the females are digging themselves out of their natal nests. And then if they catch the scent of a female, they'll land on the soil surface and they'll either begin to dig the female out or they'll start fighting with other males who are digging the female out. And what I hope you can see is that while for patrolling, we have both small and large males, by the time you get to the digging and fighting step, there is a clear and present kind of shift in frequency towards just larger morph males. And that shift persists into mating. So this is that large male fitness advantage. You can see that while some small morph males do get fitness benefits or do get mating opportunities, it's mostly large morph males to the right of that line. So what we did for this study was we collected historical data on patrolling, foraging, hovering, and mating male headwits from all of John Alcock's publications on this specific population of bees. So he actually returned to this field site and studied these bees and linked their behavior to their body size in the 70s, 80s, early 2000s. And then I also did this work in 2018 for one of the publications for my dissertation. And then in 2022, this past field season, we went back and we collected another 921 male headwits using dial calipers, again, separating this out by behavior where we did patrolling, foraging, hovering, and mating. So what we find, if we look at this patrolling line first, which is the gray one on the bottom, these gray squares, is that patrolling male headwits do decline over time by about 4% from the 1970s to now, but mating male headwits do not decline. They remain stable. So that large male fitness advantage is still present and in effect, and large male mating male headwits have not changed. When we start to look at this kind of breaking it out by behavior, so what are the size of males that are hovering? What are the size of males that are patrolling? What you're seeing on the top here are the Alcock graphs from the 1974-1975 field seasons, and then ours from 2022 are on the bottom. So looking at these hovering graphs over here on the left, I hope that you can see that the peak frequency head width has obviously shifted to the left to smaller head widths. And then also we have two entirely new categories of males that are 4.2 to 4.6 millimeters in head width that we didn't have any males that small in the 1974 population. And the same kind of thing has happened for patrolling males. There's been a shift in the peak frequency to the left and then additional novel categories of head widths that have opened up on the smallest end of the spectrum. So smaller males are getting much smaller. And also we're seeing a reduction or like shifts in the proportion of each morph type within the population. So again, this top graph is the Alcock field season, and this bottom graph is our most recent field season. And you're seeing that there is a shift in the peak frequencies and kind of the whole graph actually getting shifted over to the left to smaller body sizes for both large and small morph males. But the other thing that's important to note is that large morph males are declining in terms of their relative proportion in the population. So small morph males went from 73 to 82% of the population, and large morph males declined from 21 to 13% of the population. So this is concerning because it suggests that this climate change driven reduction in body size could actually be threatening interspecific behavioral diversity within the species and potentially even the stability of the whole alternative reproductive tactic system that Centris pallida is sort of known for. The other thing I'll kind of make as a final note is that although that large male fitness advantage has remained, there actually has been a little bit of a shift in the mating male population where we're seeing that these two largest male size classes made up about 30% of mating events in the 70s and make up only about 10% of mating events now. So we're still seeing apparently an average mating male head width that's very similar, but that's being concentrated in this smaller head width range than it was before in the 70s. All right, so a couple of final things to discuss. Why are Centris pallida males declining and other males in previous studies are not declining? Well, I think the large male fitness advantage hypothesis is probably not the reason, given that Centris pallida has that large male fitness advantage and we are seeing declines. So instead, Meredith and myself are favoring a sex bias resource allocation hypothesis. So the idea here is that in many species of bees, male bees are given less resources than female bees during development, and thus turn into smaller body-sized adults than their females. And it's possible that there's just a certain amount of resources that you need to become a bee of your species. And males are already much closer to that limit, that nutritional limit for larval survival, than females of their species. So this would mean that as this kind of sex-biased resource allocation is happening, there's less room for males to decrease in body size compared to the females of their species. And so this would work for most bees, but is not actually the case in Centris pallida. And that's because we have these really large-bodied males and this large male fitness advantage kind of driving male body sizes to be larger or equal to females of the species. So there's a lot more room for decline in this species than maybe the previous males that have been studied. And why are the species body sizes declining at all? There are 4 main hypotheses that people talk about in terms of bee body size declines. And the cool thing about studying a single population is that we have some kind of contextual information for what these specific bees are experiencing. So this first hypothesis is about habitat simplification or agricultural intensification in the area. And this is very unlikely for this population because it's surrounded by land that's managed by the National Forest Service, and there's been almost no change in development status from the 1970s to now. Another possibility is climate-induced phenological shifts. So here we have seen that there are changes in emergence time where in the 1970s, the mating males were emerging in kind of early May, and now we're seeing them emerge in late April. So there has been a phenological advancement like we've seen for many other species of bees, but this is a specialist bee and it only relies on 3 host plants, 2 species of Palo Verde and ironwood. And when you look at the data on those species of flowering plants, they have also advanced to kind of mid to late April in terms of their flowering times. And so while there might have been shifts, there's not necessarily a phenological mismatch between their host plants and the bees. Another possibility is increasing temperatures during development affecting final larval size. These are ground nesting bees. Their cells are greater than 10 centimeters in depth in most cases, and studies have suggested that when cells are that deep, they're buffered from most temperature shifts during development, so that seems unlikely. We are favoring this last potential hypothesis, which is just changes in total floral resource availability. And we think this is likely for 2 reasons. First, most people are probably aware that there's been some serious kind of drought in the southwestern United States, climate change induced reductions in rainfall that are going to change floral resource availability. And then the other thing is that this particular study site is right along the Salt River. And while the Salt River was initially dammed in the early 1900s, there have been additional renovation projects and additional dams added between the 1970s and the 2000s. And all of this has caused the river to be dramatically reduced in volume and reduce flash floods in the plains surrounding it, which is where this field site is located. So both of those things are going to potentially cause declines in floral resource availability at this site and make it harder for females to be able to provision large amounts of resources for their offspring. Lastly, I think just these data suggest there are some really interesting future studies that could be performed looking at male body size declines or desert bee declines. One thing would be to test male declines in other species that have large male fitness advantages, of which I've listed a few on this slide that are found either in the Sonoran or in the deserts of Australia. It would also be great to have concomitant studies of females in these species, which we were not able to do with Centris pallida. Although the males have been very well studied, Alcock did not provide any data on females from the 70s. So while we do provide data on females in our study in the hopes that 50 more years down the line, somebody will be able to compare female body sizes from our study to that future study. We don't have any past data that we can look at from this population. The other thing is that it would be really lovely for folks to look more closely at desert bee morphological shifts in response to climate change, potentially looking both at desert specialists and then also bees that are generalists across a range of ecosystem types. So with that, this QR code will take you to the preprint where you can find all of the data that I've shared today and more. If you have any questions, you can ask them now, or you can also find me at BeeBites and Meredith at Melaponini Mare on Twitter. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
Great, thanks so much, Megan, for that excellent talk. So let me see if there are any questions. Okay, so we have one here in the chat. If you can post your questions in the question and answer, they'll come to my attention more easily. So Susan Waters asks, do you predict an overall reduction of genetic diversity in this population as time goes on, as smaller morphs fail to mate?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it's a little bit less about smaller morphs failing to mate and more about there being an ever shrinking pool of large morph males that will continue to have fitness advantages. And so my expectation would be that, as we shrink from 21 to 13% of the population being large morph males, but we don't see any change in the mean male mating head width, that suggests that there are males that are getting multiple mating opportunities probably in that smaller and smaller proportion of the population. And that could definitely affect genetic diversity in the population over time in negative ways.
Okay, great. So earlier, Rodrigo asked, is it bad that C. pallida males are getting smaller? If so, why? Is it fitness?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think on the one hand, it is my expectation if we got rid of all the large morph males tomorrow, the species would not go extinct, right? The small morph males are perfectly capable of mating. But what is concerning, right, when we think about biodiversity loss, a lot of times we're talking about species level biodiversity, but we really should also be considering intraspecific biodiversity, right? Behavioral diversity. And so as these males get smaller and smaller and we lose that large morph male population because of that, we're going to see both changes in how the species mating biology functions, but also just a significant loss in behavioral biodiversity that I think we should care about.
Okay, one final question from Peter Steiner. Did you have a chance to assess any remnant nest pollen for nutritional quality? I know climate change is also driving decline in resource quality across plant species.
Yeah, that is a great question. We did not do any of those analyses. So I really think that there's several future studies that could be done on this population and on this species using museum samples, looking into pollen and nutritional quality, also looking at quantity of nutrition available. All of those kinds of things I think are open future questions.
Great, so it doesn't look like we have any other questions and we're out of time in any case. So thanks again, Megan. Thanks to everyone in this section, and